Hello everybody, my name is Coach Logan Revere. Welcome back to another episode on this oh so lovely pathway of learning. We're on the 6th episode now. Wow, we have been moving really fast. Again, just going to say it again. Thank you all again so much. We have reached 100 subscribers. It's awesome. We are continuing to grow. I will continue to do the best I can to keep providing all this awesome content for you guys because you guys are just eating it up. It's awesome. So in this episode of the Pathway of Learning, I'm going to kind of dive just a little bit deeper on some of those concepts I was talking about with the oil and how it's breaking down and how exactly your ball is navigating that lane based off of how you throw it. So obviously there's about a million different things that go into this, but this video is just sort of meant to encompass the bare bones basics of the easy stuff that's easy to see and is easy to identify, where if you're trying to make sense of what exactly is happening with the way you throw, it's a little bit easier to kind of get some of those missing pieces of the puzzle put in. So if you've watched a video in the past and you've gotten to see what the real dimensions of the lane look like, you know you don't really have to do a whole lot because the ball can't hook that much, right? It's an optical illusion. So keep that in the back of your head while I'm explaining most of these concepts because it'll make sense, trust me. So obviously this video is going to go into some stuff physically, but I don't want to worry so much about how we're doing it physically. I want to focus on what we're doing physically that's making the ball do a certain thing, right? What that ball is doing itself. And then we'll get into ways that you can counteract the bad stuff that you'll come to find may be bad within your game later on once I start to dive more into the physical part. This is the last part that's sort of catered toward the lane before we dive into the physical stuff, which I know you, as much as I, are both equally as excited to get into. So for starters, I think it's important that we identify what kind of bowler we are, right? Everybody has different strengths and weaknesses, and it's important that we identify that kind of stuff so we can play to our strengths more and avoid the things that we're weak with the longest. So when it comes to ways that impact how you have to play the lane, there are two big ones encompassed by a handful of minor ones that I'll touch on today. So the two main ones are going to be the relation between the speed of which you deliver the bowling ball and the amount of RPMs, revs per minute, or spin that you're putting on that bowling ball simultaneous to your speed. So it's one thing if you have a lot of power when it comes to speed, but if your revolutions do not match up well with that speed, that is going to put you at a disadvantage or an advantage accordingly. Vice versa, if you deliver the bowling ball slow and your revs are too high or too low and encompassed with that, that's also equally just as bad. Now obviously nobody throws the ball the same way, but we still want to have kind of similar numbers when it comes to speed and RPMs because we know the lane dimensions, right? There's certain things that are just certainly going to be more optimal. Obviously, there is no one way to strike, but in a world that has a million different interpretations of something, there are some things that are just optimal. This mostly becomes pertinent when it comes to being able to play those different zones I was talking about in the last episode, right? For example, if you have a very low ball speed and a very high rev rate, you're going to find it very hard to play toward the right side of the lane if you're right-handed because you have to rely so much on that oil in the center. Like, let's think, right? If the ball is going really slow and has all that spinning power, it needs to glide on that oil for as long as it can. So when that oil cuts off toward the end of the lane, it can see that change in direction, right? If we move too far to the right, it's going to see way too much friction way too quickly and is going to hook off the left end of the lane. Versus if you have the opposite problem where you have a lot of speed but not enough revolutions, that bowling ball is not going to have enough time to see enough friction to hook in enough, meaning you might run on a lane on the right-hand side. So in the video immediately following this, it'll be a supplementary video, it discusses ways that you can actually compute your ball speed and your RPMs. So after this video, I will make sure you watch that and come back and reference what I'm going to show you because this will help you match make what your problem may be. So I'm going to throw up a photo of a chart right here. So this shows the relation between your miles per hour and your revs per minute, or your RPMs, which again, you'll be able to calculate here in a moment once you get into the next episode. So once you understand this, you kind of know where you're going to be confined. Now, obviously, you can do things physically that can alter these numbers, which I am promoting very, very greatly, but just make sure that you're aware of where you're at currently and the things you can be working on, like subconsciously, before I start to dive into the physical stuff. So although these two are the biggest ones when it comes to it, there's a handful of minor things that play a pretty key role in it as well. One of the biggest ones when it comes to the minor category is going to be the angle of rotation of which that bowling ball is released out of your hand. So what I mean by this is how many degrees of angle to the left if you're right-handed or to the right if you're left-handed is that ball rotating as it's going down the lane, not as it's entering the pocket. The angle of entry is varied from the angle of rotation because of the precession that ball is making as it's going down the lane. It is the angle, let's say I release at a 90-degree angle. That thing is completely perpendicular as it comes off my hand. As it goes down the lane, it slowly faces back in toward the pocket, which is of course what we want. However, given that we kind of know what dimensions we're working with, we don't want to have 90 degrees of angle of rotation off our hand because we don't need to do that much work, right? Within this sport, a lot of times, less is more commonly better, right? Less is more in this sport, as we've come to know and love, especially now that we understand what the dimensions of the lane look like. So don't feel like you have to work super hard to really get a ton of angle of rotation because, to put it simply, we don't need it. When it comes to thinking of how the angle of rotation affects the bowling balls going down the lane, let's go back to that car analogy on the ice, right? Imagine you're driving that car and you have the wheel turned 90 degrees the whole time, and you throw whatever speed, right? And it's going to whatever speed. It's going to have a very hard time to turn at first, but the minute that oil cuts off, it's going to turn a lot. Versus if you turn it a little bit, it'll be able to kind of gradually turn. So the shape is what's going to be the biggest dictatorship. It's going to be how much length that bowling ball is creating. The more angle of rotation off your hand, the longer and more aggressive that ball will seem, versus the less angle of rotation off your hand, the more docile and less aggressive that's going to seem, which sometimes is better or for worse. But again, just want to make sure that you're able to identify that moving forward. Another very minor one that does make a key difference is the amount of tilt of which you're releasing the bowling ball. So the best way I can describe this is to compare a wheel that's rolling and one of those bottle tops that's spinning. So obviously, when you think of a wheel rolling, it's going end over end like this. And a bottle top is like this, completely perpendicular to the lane surface itself. So obviously, depending on how much tilt you have as it's going down the lane, will determine how many times it's rolling end over end directly on that lane surface. The less tilt you have, or the more end over end the ball goes, the easier time it's going to have reading more and sooner. Versus the more tilt you have, it's going to have a harder time seeing that surface, that bowling ball as much and read less and later. So now that you understand this kind of stuff, this will make a little bit more sense next time you go bowling, right? This goes into my challenge for all of you. So the next time you go bowling, after you watch the video following this, identify what kind of bowler you are, whether you're speed dominant, revolution dominant, or balanced as it is, and monitor your ball speed, monitor your RPMs, and see how much tilt am I creating? What angle of rotation is it coming off my hand? And then you'll say, okay, that's why that bowling ball makes that shape for me and not for this person, or that's why this bowling ball doesn't react the way I saw it online, because that's not how I throw compared to the people I see online. And again, a lot of stuff here comes with changes you have to make physically, but you have to be able to identify that stuff so you know what changes you need to make. And I can't stress on this enough. If you take that test and you are, for example, speed dominant, I'm not telling you that you need to learn to throw it perfectly balanced every time, because that's not always the answer, right? I'm just trying to instill the fact that there is no one way to bowl. So being some cookie cutter bowler that only knows how to bowl one way will only get you so far, right? You're limiting how many zones you can play. You're limiting how that ball, the angle of rotation, the tilt and everything, you're limiting all that stuff to where people who have that versatility will usually crown the victor, right? So by you being less of a cookie cutter and more of a Swiss Army knife and being able to play the lane in different ways and be able to pick, okay, I'm going to throw a rev dominant ball, I'm going to throw a speed dominant ball, all that stuff, that's the stuff that matters. But in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to bowling on just a recreational pattern, usually those that are more so toward the balance category crown the victor, because the oil is just so forgiving. So again, be sure you stay tuned, because in the next episode, we are going to start diving into everyone's favorite part, which is going to be the physical game. So if you enjoy this kind of content, be sure to leave a like and subscription. It really helps me out. And leave a comment if you have any questions. And as always, I will see you all as you continue your pathway of learning.